What is sedition? We're going to answer that question coming up next. So the reference I'm using here is from findlaw.com, and it's sedition. This was last updated January 8th of 2021, so it's a recent update on that. And I'm just going to read this verbatim. The preamble to this is, suppose that over a course of a few months, a small band of armed militants has coordinated strategies to distribute firearms and take over the nation's capital by force through a website on a clandestine deep web. All indications show that the group is dead serious in its intentions, but they are thwarted by an FBI investigation that leads to arrests. While sharing information and discussing ideas, even distasteful ones, is generally protected as free speech, the FBI believes this crosses the line. The alleged ringleaders of the plot are charged with seditious conspiracy, or simply referred to as sedition, a federal crime related to treason and other anti-government offenses. Sedition is a serious felony punishable by fines of up to 20 years in prison, and it refers to the act of inciting a revolt or violence against a lawful authority with the goal of destroying or overthrowing that authority. The following provides an overview of this particular crime against the government with historical references. So that's the beginning of this. Next part. Seditious conspiracy and federal law, the basics. The federal law against seditious conspiracy can be found in Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which includes treason, rebellion, and similar offenses, and especially Title 18, Part 2384, or Section 2384. I don't know what the little double S symbol is. I guess statute maybe. According to the statutory definition of sedition, it is a crime for two or more people within a jurisdiction of the United States. This includes to conspire to overthrow or destroy by force the government of the United States or to level war against them, to oppose by force the authority of the United States government, to prevent, hinder, or delay by force the execution of any law of the United States, or to take, seize, or possess by force any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof. The next part, free speech, sedition, and treason. In order to get a conviction for seditious conspiracy, the government must prove that the defendant in fact conspired to use force. Simply advocating for the use of force is not the same thing, and in most cases is protected as free speech under the First Amendment. For example, two or more people who give public speeches suggesting the need for a total revolution by any means necessary have not necessarily conspired to overthrow the government. Rather, they are just sharing their opinions, however unsavory. By actively planning such an action, distributing guns, working out the logistics of an attack, actively opposing lawful authority, etc., could be considered a seditious conspiracy. Ultimately, the goal is to prevent threats against the United States while protecting individuals' First Amendment rights, which isn't always such a clear distinction. Sedition differs from treason, defined in Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, in a fundamental way. While seditious conspiracy is generally defined as conduct or language inciting rebellion against the state or authority of the state, treason is the more serious offense of actively levying war against the United States or giving aid to its enemies. Another way of looking at it is that seditious conspiracy often occurs before an act of treason. Part 4. Seditious conspiracy, historical examples. And I'm only going to go over one example. There's only two here. I'll go over the first one because I actually have the page brought up. The first one is many of the more high-profile seditious conspiracy cases won by the United States government involve Puerto Rican nationalists plotting to overthrow the U.S. and assert their independence. The first was Pablo Albizu Campos, who, along with 9 accomplices, was convicted of sedition in 1937 and jailed for 10 years for attempting to overthrow the government. He and others had been active members of the Nationalist Party, which, according to the U.S. prosecutors, was aimed at independence through force. Other similar cases involving Puerto Rican nationalists followed. All right, so I'm going to go over Pedro Albizu Campos here, and there's a website for him. It's jabaros.com/albizu.htm. And this gives how Pedro Albizu Campos got a bad deal, September 12th, 1891 through April 21st of 1965. So I guess he was about 74 and a half years old. Okay. So, kind of summarize, Pedro Albizu Campos, he was gifted with languages. He spoke 6 languages, so polyglot is what that's called. He graduated Harvard Law School with the highest grade point average in his class, though it also says that his professor kept delaying his final exams in order to keep him from graduating with the rest of his class. And that was because, I guess, it says, in this article, it says that the professor was hostile towards him because of mixed racial heritage. Albizu Campos was the president and spokesperson of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party from 1930 until his death in 1965. He was called El Maestro because of his oration skill, his ability to orate. I can't think about that word, or think of how to say that word. He was imprisoned for 26 years for attempting to overthrow the United States government in Puerto Rico. Now, then and now, Puerto Rico is not a state. Puerto Rico is a territory. In 1950, he planned and called for armed uprising in several cities in Puerto Rico on behalf of independence. Afterward, he was convicted and imprisoned again. He died in 1965, shortly after his pardon and release from federal prison, sometime after suffering a stroke. There is controversy over his medical treatment in prison. And it goes over his birth, his graduation from Ponce High School, which was called a public school for the city's white elite. Let's see, he was awarded a scholarship for engineering specializing in chemistry at the University of Vermont. In 1913, transferred to Harvard. World War I, he volunteered for the United States Infantry. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant and sent to the city of Ponce, where he organized the town's home guard. So he didn't... let's see... didn't get really sent out because they were segregated in the army back then. He was discharged in 1919, and let's see, let's go the bad deal. Let's go here on June 23rd, 1921. After graduating Harvard, he returned to Puerto Rico, but without his law diploma. He had been a victim of racial discrimination by one of his professors who delayed Albizu Campos's third-year final exams for courses in evidence and corporations. He was about to graduate with the highest grade point average in his entire law school class. As such, he was scheduled to give the valedictorian speech during the graduation ceremonies. His professor delayed his exam so that he could not complete his work and avoided the embarrassment of Puerto Rican law valedictorian. Yada, yada, yada. Pretty much, I'm going 1932. Okay, so this is kind of where it started here. Nationalist activities wanted independence from foreign banks, absentee plantation owners, and United States colonial rule. Accordingly, they started organizing in Puerto Rico. In 1919, Jose Cole Icuchi, Y-E, I think. It's been a while since I've spoke Spanish. In Russian, the Y is U. So Jose Cole Icuchi, a member of the Union Party of Puerto Rico, took followers with him to form the Nationalist Association of Puerto Rico in San Juan to work for independence. They gained legislative approval to repatriate the remains of Ramon Betances, a Puerto Rican patriot from Paris, France. So I guess he died there. In 1932, Albizu published a letter accusing Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, an American pathologist with the Rockefeller Institute, of killing Puerto Rican patients at San Juan's Presbyterian Church. As part of his medical research, Albizu Campos had been given an unmailed letter by Rhodes addressed to a colleague found after Rhodes returned to the United States. I'm not going to read that. Albizu sent copies of this letter from Dr. Rhodes to the League of Nations, the Pan American Union, the American Civil Liberties, ACLU, newspapers, embassies in the Vatican. He also sent copies of the Rhodes letter to the media and published his own letter in the Puerto Rico Progress. He used an opportunity to attack the United States imperialism, writing, "The mercantile monopoly is backed by financial monopoly. The United States have mortgaged the country to their own financial interests," which I think he's talking about Puerto Rico. "The military intervention destroyed agriculture. It changed the country into a huge sugar plantation." Okay, so I'm trying to figure out where he was actually convicted of sedition here. Let's see. Okay, so what led that? Albizu accused Rhodes and the United States of trying to exterminate the native population, saying, "Evidently, submissive people coming under the North American Empire, under the shadow of its flag, are taken ill and die. The facts confirmed absolutely a system of extermination," he went on. And I'm sure that's from the letter I didn't read. You can read this. I'll leave a link in the description below. Or the Rockefeller Foundation, has in fact been working out a plan to exterminate our people by inoculating patients unfortunate enough to go to them with virus of incurable diseases such as cancer. After these events, a federal grand jury, after these events on April 3rd, 1936, a federal grand jury submitted an indictment against Albizu Campos and others. They were charged with sedition and other violations of the Title 18 of the United States Code. So it doesn't say anywhere in here where he allowed an armed uprising. He was mostly like a political prisoner. That's kind of where I want to go with this, and I don't know if this is a whole story either. I mean, it's probably supporting Puerto Rico and so forth. So I definitely probably has some kind of bias to it, or I don't know if it's got all the facts. I don't know the story. Today was the first time I heard about this. Anyways, the point of this is that sedition has been used a lot lately. Anybody that disagrees with the United States government is considered seditious. And I'm not talking about, mostly the United States government, because the United States government is falling into an authoritarian, totalitarian state. And if you speak against them, it's considered sedition. Whereas I read here from Fine Law that sedition is the actual armed uprising against. So another thing I saw today, I think I was on Tim Pool had on one of his channels, was that Texas is putting together something to future vote on, or in the future vote on Texas seceding. And other states have been talking about the same thing, whereas others are saying this is sedition. But this is not an armed uprising against the United States, actually. This is kind of saying we no longer want to be a part of the United States. And if such thing happens, I'm sure, because there's military bases in Texas, I'm sure that those military bases would have to pack up and move. They pretty much have to unfold the flag. Or they just do what they did in Iraq and leave all the freaking weapons and armor and everything else there for, the locals to use against somebody else in the future, I suppose. But Texas might not want to do that just because who wants to pay for the maintenance on all those vehicles, right? Anyways, I want to read this because I want the sedition, the actual term out there, as opposed to just this idea that if somebody disagrees with you, it's sedition, it's treason. No, I mean, there's not a lot of treason cases in this country, and there's even fewer sedition cases. And I would say even going back, some of the most recent sedition cases have been thrown out by judges because there's just not enough evidence. Because the First Amendment does protect your speech. So there has to be action behind that. Distributing weapons, trying to, like Timothy McVeigh blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City back in 92, I believe it was. 91 or 92. Maybe, no. It was 93 or 94 because Waco happened in 91, 92. I think that happened in 92. Anyways, that, that blowing up the federal building, that could be considered sedition and maybe treason if it was considered an act of war. I don't know how they would delineate the act of protest versus the act of war, but that's politics for you. Me even saying this right now, I'm sure it will be considered seditious, right? Because I'm trying to inform you on what just the word means and trying to kind of leave out my own, interpretation of it too much. But if you ever have questions on these words, these words are thrown around. They're thrown around so many times, mainly because they want to slightly change the definitions of these words. That's how they use being racist nowadays. Everything's racist nowadays. This cup of instant coffee is in fact racist. You know why? I have no idea why, but I'm sure, if I, hold my breath for 90 seconds or so and my lips turn purple, I'll be cognitively aware enough to come up with a good definition on why this is racist. But that whole word has been used so many times over the past, 10 years. That's racist. That it's taken on a new meaning because every time they staple that to another thing, they're trying to actually redefine what the word means. When these words actually mean something, right? When they say words mean something, well, actually a lot of times words do mean things. If they didn't mean anything, any book, any article, any newspaper, anything you ever read would actually have no meaning to it. And any story that you've read would actually have no meaning to it because those words would mean nothing, right? We convey sometimes very succinct and very clear ideas through the terminology we use, such as sedition, right? It has a very clear meaning. They're trying to make that meaning less clear by broadening the scope of that word so that it encompasses more and more things to where even telling you the definition of a word now could be considered sedition by somebody else. But it won't be considered sedition according to the law or any reasonable person. That being said, that's the definition for the day. Have a great day, boys and girls, and I'll talk to you next time.